My name is Adrienne Esposito. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens Campaign for the Environment. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. You're here listening to the first presentation from Propel Energy. Propel Energy is actually a very large, transformative energy transmission project that has been selected by New York State to help us with updating and upgrading our energy infrastructure. It will help with renewable energy, but it also is needed for energy infrastructure purposes, not only on Long Island, but up to Westchester and other areas too. So we have two of the Propel staff here today who will be able to answer your questions, and we'll be providing a presentation. So first we're going to listen to their presentation, then we're going to take your questions. So I'm happy. Shannon, are you first or is Stephen first?
That'll be me first.
Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to Shannon. Shannon, would you kindly introduce yourself and your position, and feel free to begin. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Adrienne, and thank you to the WindWorks Coalition for hosting us this afternoon. We appreciate the opportunity to share some information with you and consider this the first of many conversations that we'll be having about Propel New York Energy. I'm joined here today for the presentation with my colleague, Steve Cole-Hatchard. He'll pick up a section of the presentation, but we also have several members of the Propel team on the call from the New York Power Authority. So thank you to all of them for joining. And if there are specific questions about NYPA, of course, they'll handle those directly. So Propel is an interesting teaming. We are a project that's comprised of two teams, one from the New York Power Authority and one from New York Transco. We are experts in electric transmission development and execution, as well as operations and maintenance. And in a minute, you'll see a map that will show where the New York Power Authority and New York Transco are executing a bulk of the electric transmission improvements across New York State for the purposes of not only upgrading the reliability and resiliency of the grid, but also doing so in a manner that creates clean energy pathways for renewables to flow. And that's going to really be the theme of what we talk about here with Propel New York Energy. We are unmatched in terms of electric transmission development in New York State. We're New York companies that are really looking forward to pulling this project together and delivering a product that will serve New Yorkers now and into the future. So we're really thrilled to have this opportunity, and we'll walk you through all of the components of the Propel New York Energy project, our process, the timeline that we have for the project, and really, again, look forward to this being an ongoing discussion and dialogue with all of your organizations. So if you didn't know it, which hopefully everybody does, but transmission is the enabler. It is the backbone to the electric delivery system. It is the way that we take power from where it's generated and ultimately bring it to where it's consumed, traveling over long distances, and making sure that we can do that efficiently, effectively, and at a reasonable cost. So that's what we focus on, both New York Power Authority and New York Transco, is building out that backbone to make sure it can serve New York now and into the future. It's key to our economic competitiveness. It's critical to making sure we have reliable and resilient power and function whenever we flip a light or plug in an electric car or do any other activity that uses the power grid. And as folks know, New York State has some of the most aggressive and nation-leading goals to advance clean energy, and the transmission grid is a key part of making sure that we can achieve those goals. Much of New York State's electric transmission grid was put in service in 1980 and before. And so now we're seeing a real focus of investment and attention to make sure that we upgrade that grid to not only serve our needs, but also to get ready for this increasing flow of clean energy. So I mentioned that Transco and New York Power Authority are executing a number of projects across the state, and there are other developers that are doing so as well. You can see there's a lot going on. All of the colored lines on here represent projects that are in varying forms of execution. These are electric transmission projects, which include the wires and the substations that connect it all together. New York Transco has a couple of these that we just recently put into service earlier this summer. And I know the New York Power Authority has a number as well that are either in service or will soon be entering in service. And what we're going to focus on today is this teal section, obviously down here in downstate, across Long Island into New York City and parts of Westchester County. That is Propel New York Energy. So Propel is one piece of this much larger puzzle for upgrading these clean energy pathways and ensuring our electric delivery system is ready to meet the challenge and make sure that we have reliable power to all customers throughout New York State. I'm going to pass it along to Steve, who is the project director for Propel New York Energy on the New York Transco side, and he's going to walk you through the core components of the challenge we were solving for with Propel, the process that we went through, and ultimately the core components of the project that we're advancing toward permitting. Go ahead, Steve.
Thanks, Shannon. Good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate everybody's time here. Like Shannon mentioned, my name is Steve Colhatcher. Excuse me. I'm the project director from New York Transco for the Propel project. We'll start off here with what's so eloquently known as the PPTN, the Public Policy Transmission Need. This is essentially the competitive process that the New York Independent System Operator puts on to solve the ultimate need across the transmission system. In the case of the solution that we were solving for here, Long Island in and of itself, geography, it is an island, but also electrically, it's also almost an island as well. There really are only a few ties out onto the island, and the transmission system across the island by itself has also not been updated in a number of years. So the purpose of this PPTN process was to really do two things. It was to bolster the transmission network system across the island, and as well as to establish a few more ties between Long Island and the greater New York transmission grid. Offshore wind is obviously, at the top of everybody's mind. One of the benefits to the project that was ultimately selected here is that, our solution is not just specific to the offshore wind. One of the things that the solution that I'll go into in a little bit more detail later on is it can also bring some of the cheaper energy from upstate New York during certain system conditions. It can bring that cheaper energy down and onto the island. So the power can flow both ways along our lines. This is all to facilitate the achievement of what Shannon mentioned, the CLCPA. No matter where the generation sited, offshore wind, solar, way upstate, off the shores of Long Island, transmission is the key. It's the key to moving the energy from where it's generated onshore and through the greater network. We did go through the competitive process with the NYISO, and ultimately the solution that I'll share with everybody here was deemed the most cost-efficient solution for the Long Island PPTN. So if we flip to the next slide, to give a brief overview, we will be installing and upgrading various stations across both Long Island, the Bronx, and Westchester. We will be installing both new underground and submarine transmission lines. There are a few transmission lines that will be crossing the Long Island Sound and make landfall in Westchester County, and then there will be about 70 miles of underground high voltage transmission lines that will be across both Long Island and make those critical ties into the Bronx Westchester area. We primarily use existing public rights of way. That's the streets that we drive on every day. Streets all over the New York metro area. They currently have electric transmission lines in them, so this is not any sort of new technology. Those are the counties that we're meandering through again, both Nassau and Suffolk County, and then we do cross into Queens on the southern tie into New York City, and then in Westchester County is how we make the tie to the Westchester area. Our preliminary schedule, of course, this is all predicated on permitting. Construction is scheduled to start in 2026 and an in-service date of 2030. So about 6.5 years from now is when we're currently scheduled to be in service. If there's no questions, we can flip to, just a general overview slide here. Right when I say the word,
Stephen, we're going to take questions at the end, so keep going.
Okay, thank you. When I mentioned transmission, that is really the lines that are responsible for carrying the electricity long distances between substations. These are not the lines that actually connect into the local residences. We will not be touching those lines. And again, like Shannon has mentioned, and like I mentioned before, generation, it doesn't matter what type, wind, solar, hydro, all these different forms of energy generation need transmission to reach, their ultimate need of what they serve. And then I believe the next slide here, Shannon, will be the overview map. So again, if everybody's familiar with the island, which I'm assuming that's true, there's Nassau County in the beginning. The first line starts on the south shore of Long Island at the Barrett substation and goes into East Garden City. And then from East Garden City is where we start to see, one 345 kV line goes from East Garden City into Tremont. That's the South Bronx. And then from East Garden City to Shore Road, there will be another 345 kV line. And then from Shore Road to Ruland Road, there's a 345 kV line. And again, the lines between East Garden City, Barrett, Shore Road, and Ruland Road, those are really meant to form that backbone across Long Island to help power move up, down, left, right across the island. And then the second part of the need that we had to solve with the NYISO was connecting the rest of the Long Island grid into the greater New York City area. That's accomplished with the tie into Tremont, and then from Shore Road to New Rochelle, which will be a new station. Those will be two 345 kV circuits of submarine cable, and then we will meander through the streets of Westchester to make two 345 kV ties into Springbrook. I touched on this a bit before as well. The benefit of these projects is, depending on system conditions, power can flow both ways. It's not just bringing offshore wind out. If there's a need on the island and there's a surplus of energy in other parts of the state, these three ties from Westchester and the Bronx into Long Island will serve as a way to bring that power as well into the island. So it's all about, further connecting Long Island to the greater New York City grid. I think that wraps up me, Shannon. I'll pass it back to you here for a brief overview of the timeline. You might want to click yourself off.
There we go. Thanks, Steve. I know that picture is probably very chaotic for folks to look at, especially if it's your first time. It won't be the last time, and we'll get even more detailed with our mapping. We're obviously very early out from receiving award by the NYISO this past June. We are diligently working on engineering so that we can advance the project into the permitting phase through the Article 7 as one of the key permits with the New York Public Service Commission that we will need to obtain. There's a whole host of permitting that's required at multiple levels for this type of a project. But the Article 7 is sort of the key one from the state level. And if folks are not familiar, but I'm sure many are, given all of the projects that are undertaking Article 7s at the moment, that is the one-stop shop where all of the state agencies, all of the interested stakeholders and parties can come together, collaborate, review all components of the project, undertake an detailed environmental review, and ultimately get ready for what will be eventually construction plans, environmental management and construction plans. Once the project has received its certificate, we would then get into that phase. So it's multi-stepped, very involved, lots of review, opportunities for comment, opportunities to put feedback to improve the project, which Transco has certainly seen in our other projects. So it's a process that we don't anticipate kicking off until with an actual submission until July of next year. That's an estimated date when we would submit our Article 7 application. So between now and then, We will be working diligently again on engineering, environmental studies, all of the components that are required for that full package, as well as, and this cannot be understated enough, all of the stakeholder engagement that is critical for the success of a project like this. So working with all of the stakeholders from the municipal level up, the neighbors, the civic groups, the environmental justice organizations, all of the interested parties that may want to just understand the project, business groups. We will be out there, we'll be talking to you. We'd love to hear feedback on suggestions or organizations that are on the call today might have for meetings and venues, and just any tips or tricks that you think would be helpful as we engage with stakeholders. We are early, often, and inclusive is sort of our motto in developing the project, and ultimately that will carry us through to construction and getting us to that May 2030 estimated in service date. So there's a lot of work to be done. We are very, very early on in the project process, and really look forward to hearing the thoughts of all of the stakeholders so we can make the project the best option for New York State and the smoothest construction. A big piece of this is making sure that we have the New York workforce leveraged as much as practicable in our project execution, which is something both the New York Power Authority and New York Transco have a history in doing in past projects. So that'll be key to the success of the project, making sure that as many local jobs can be filled as possible. And as I mentioned, making sure that we have regular two-way communication from the very get-go with all of the interested stakeholders, affected stakeholders within the project footprint. That is the only way to a successful project, and we really look forward to getting on the ground and hearing from neighbors about concerns, questions, and ways that we can become even more invested in the communities that we will serve downstate. So this is more of a quick summary of the project. Again, this is an electric transmission project. This is to improve the reliability and resiliency of the overall network through Long Island, parts of New York City, and Westchester County. This will create bidirectional clean energy pathways to serve homes and businesses throughout the state. It helps address the state's clean energy goals and ultimately gets us an investment that will serve us now into the future and will bring lots of jobs and economic opportunity, again, now and into the future. We're really looking forward to a successful project. We look forward to working with all of you, and we can't wait to hear your questions, comments, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present today.
Thank you, Shannon and Stephen. Okay, so if we could stop this, well, maybe we should keep the screen sharing because people might have questions about the maps.
Yeah, we can definitely go back to any slide if there's questions. I'll flip back.
Okay. All right. Let me just start out with, so can you just elaborate a little bit more? You said that they will be bidirectional, and that some places you felt in New York had excess energy, while some places obviously have very constrained energy. Can you talk about those places that have excess energy and how that could come to Long Island if we need it? Because one of the greatest challenges here, as you know, was said earlier, is that we have many constraints with getting energy on the island.
So I think I'll take that one, Shannon. Great question. There's no particular areas that we identify that have, a surplus pocket of energy. The benefit, because it all depends on, system conditions from a load perspective as well as from a generator perspective, right? So if certain generators are online, if it's a very sunny day per se, right, and there's a lot of solar energy in upstate New York, in the past and currently, Long Island can't take the benefit of that because they're, electrically they're on their own island because there's only so many ties there. The establishment of these three, zonal ties between Long Island and the greater New York City area will let that on those days where there's a surplus of solar per se in upstate New York, these ties will allow that solar power onto Long Island. So there's not specific ones that I can cite, but as just a general rule of thumb from a system perspective, it just opens the door a bit more for the power to flow a bit more freely.
Okay. Here's a question. If you have a fixed price contract, how will you protect against sharply rising material costs the way copper and other rising costs have hit offshore wind developers, causing them to want to back out of firm contracts signed a while ago?
That's a great question. Our bids were developed, a very short while ago, so we did start to see quite a bit of those price increases. So, I certainly don't know what the market is going to do in the future here,
Are
right?
you sure?
Because but I can say we did see a bit of that. We anticipated it as much as we could. We have, started those conversations with a lot of the cable manufacturers for the copper to start to understand from their perspective as well, what's the best way to get to, a firm fixed price as soon as possible. And that's ultimately our goal is, it's a balancing act between, how soon can we lock in our prices based on, when we think we're going to be done with permitting. That's really something that Shannon talked about before. Our experience here in New York State, it's something that, we've done on many, many projects prior, and a lot of the same means and methods there we'll look to implement here.
Okay, great. Thank you. Could you go back to the map?
The Propel map.
Yeah, please.
Yep, certainly.
Because I know one of the things I know we, CCE, but maybe other WindWorks members will get, and will be about, are these underground cables? Are these above ground? If they're underground, do you know how deep they'll be? I see you're going to go under the Long Island Sound.
Correct. So
talk a little bit more
probably
about these pathways.
Yep. So I probably should have mentioned that a bit more detailed, but all the lines that you see on this will be underground. In the streets, in the public roadways, we did assume 3 feet of cover. So, that's 3 feet between the top of the duct bank and, the driving surface, we'll call it. The crossing to the left that goes into Tremont, that is actually a horizontal directional drill. So, we'll be drilling, underneath the water, essentially at that point in the ground. And then from Shore Road to New Rochelle, that is submarine cable. So pretty similar to how offshore wind developers do it. We'll do some form of horizontal directional drill to get from land out into the sea. And then we'll install the submarine cable. We still have to go through our final design, but general rule of thumb is probably somewhere between 5 and 15 feet into the seabed.
And what's the diameter on the cable?
About 4,000 kc mil, which
I don't know what that means.
Yeah. Let me convert that quick for you.
Okay. I was thinking more in terms of inches of feet. You could give that diameter.
Yeah, it's about 3.5 to 4 inches, maybe.
Okay, great. And I know some of the offshore wind projects, they're encasing cables in concrete. Will you be doing that?
In certain parts of the city, yes, we will be.
Okay. Some of the other questions I think our staff is thinking about, because we get these questions. What about EMFs? How far down will the cable go, and will the community, be asking or have issues about it? Can you say anything about that?
Shannon, you want to take that one? Or?
Yeah, so I'll take that. So obviously safety, health, that is primary to us, to New York Power Authority. So plans and protocols are developed and will be implemented to make sure that we're compliant with all of the requirements, including EMF. For folks that maybe don't know, New York State does have EMF standards for electric transmission projects for both the magnetic field and the electric field. So we have to be compliant. That would be a requirement within a condition within the Article 7 application and ultimate certificate. So that is one key thing. Underground cables like what we are proposing in Propel, the electric field is entirely eliminated as it's screened out by the sheathing and everything around the cable. So that's not a concern. And again, we will design and construct the project to achieve the environmental compliance, including the magnetic field requirement that New York State has. We will have, of course, EMF expert studies modeling done as part of the project once we get into the Article 7.
Okay. Okay, just a few more quick questions here. And I don't see any hands raised. So if somebody wants to ask a question, please unmute yourself and feel free to jump in and ask the question. That's absolutely fine. No, we're not going to get offended. But in the meantime, let me just keep asking the questions in the chat. So when you go under the Long Island Sound, and you may have already said this, but how deep under the bottomlands or the benthic region, and this may be too in the weeds yet, but do you anticipate being?
Yeah, so I can't commit to an exact number at this point. It,
Okay.
it will definitely be in the seabed. It really is. It's based on the final detailed design, and we're just not at that point yet.
Okay. And as you progress and have more detailed routes, I'm sure, as you know, more and more, micro communities will want to know more and more about this. What is your plan for outreach? I know you said earlier that you really believe in outreach and public engagement. And, honestly, we hear that a lot. But do you have, a plan to really go talk to these communities? Because this is a giant project. There will be a lot of communities impacted.
You are 100% right, Adrian. We have about 35 municipal bodies, that's just municipal bodies, obviously, that we are impacting with the project, which in a very densely populated area, that's a lot of stakeholders, that's a lot of neighbors, that's a lot of organizations impacted. We recognize that. We know there's a lot of people that talk about engagement. We show that we do engagement. We have a history of this that we're bringing to the table that will be amplified for this project. So we will be taking it grassroots to grass tops to make sure that everyone is included, involved, has a voice in the process, and knows how to work with our team to make sure that the project gets done. We will have multiple phases of planning and execution for engagement. So at this point, we're in sort of this pre-permitting education and awareness phase where we're just trying to get the information out there with the promise that as the engineering has progressed, where we can get to the street level maps, which frankly, that's what people care about, right? They want to see where this is going exactly, what streets, lanes, byways, avenues, with very fine detail. That is something we will be taking to each municipality. We will go through neighborhoods to discuss this. We will do door knocking. We will be on the ground with people, boots on the ground, to explain the project and engage people. And it's critical to the success. We will not be successful in executing this project if we don't have that level of engagement as soon as possible. So that's our charge. That's what we want to do. And we want to become a part of the community. So I know everybody says that too. Yes. There are great programs that, and I won't speak for them, but the New York Power Authority has that we hope we can leverage for Propel. Our teams and extended through Transco's owners have a lot of the footprint covered here. We hope to leverage those relationships. But we want to be present. That's what's going to make this project successful. Transmission projects are complicated. They disrupt daily lives because of traffic flow impacts from construction. And our goal is to find out as much information as we can to limit those sorts of impacts. And the only way you can do that is by getting out into the communities and engaging.
Okay, great. Jeff Schuman, I see your hand was up. It's down. I think it's still up, but can you please unmute yourself and ask a question, Jeff?
Okay, I just had a quick question. On the slide here, it says that you will be building 4 new substations. I'm just wondering, will you be upgrading any existing substations?
Good question.
Yes, we will be. It's not an exhaustive list, but there will be upgrades at Tremont, Springbrook, the New Rochelle station's new. The Shore Road Station will be one of the new ones. There is work at Syosset as well from an upgrade perspective. Ruling Road is an existing station, but it will have a new piece of it, and then a similar story in Barrett, and then at East Garden City as well. There will be upgrades at that location too.
Is that good, Jeff? Wait, you're muted.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
That's good.
All right, thanks. So I'm sorry, can you just elaborate for a minute on Barrett? Are you did you say you're upgrading or just using existing infrastructure there?
We'll be adding infrastructure there. The current plan is to be inside the, for our facilities, will be inside the existing fence line of the Barrett.
Okay, that's really what I was asking.
Correct.
Okay, great. Randall, do you have a question?
Yes, hi, thank you. I wanted to know if there was like a plan to address the NIMBYs, people that don't want things in their backyard, and the misinformation campaigns that have been popping up against wind energy and transmission.
So I think that's where the
Yes, what's your plan, Shannon? No, I'm just kidding.
I think that is really where the engagement comes into play, and having a presence, a regular voice throughout the communities that the project is proposed and even beyond, making sure that we can address those concerns head on. Every transmission project I've ever worked on does have NIMBY issues. Usually it's fairly small group of people. This is about the greater good, though. This project is about facilitating a future for New York State. And that is something that we need to really highlight. This is about reliability and resiliency. And I would be surprised if there's not a person that doesn't support having a more reliable and resilient power grid. It is key to, it's almost like having the highways and an effective train system. It is the same sort of priority for making sure that we are functioning as an economy, as a society, and that power is reliably delivered to folks. So we're gonna keep focusing on the core elements, and hopefully there's a few folks on this call today that'll help us with the messaging, because I do think it takes a lot of voices to make sure that it's very clear on what these projects are intended to produce.
At what step in your timeline do those sorts of things start to take place?
For the NIMBYs, it'll be pretty quickly after we go in to do municipal briefings and municipal meetings where we are on town boards, village boards, county meetings. That's when it starts to kind of snowball.
Which step number is that? Does that refer to?
So for us, that'll happen pretty early on. Once we get the engineering to a point where we can talk about street level mapping. So that would be, later this year, maybe into early next year, where we start to see that coming out. I will say we are aware of some concerns already that have popped up. They're frankly not related to Propel at all from the standpoint of construction or impacts, but we have heard some bubbling of concerns.
As you will continue to hear those bubbles, I'm sure. Even though I know you said it's for the greater good, you'll be surprised if people, have issues, but they will. But I just want to say, I think Preston, was your hand up, or did I see a question from you in the chat? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, I just really wanted to get an understanding about what your plan was to engage MWDBEs throughout the development of this project, particularly as a lot of these projects are going to be running through environmental justice communities, where a lot of folks who are disproportionately receiving the effects of climate change deserve a hand in these projects. So I just wanted to see what your plans were to engage those communities.
So I think there were probably two questions there. MWBEs, Steve, that would be more on the procurement side of things.
You know, there's no hard goal here of 5-10% or anything like that. It is probably one of the first questions we ask on every single procurement, and I firmly believe that you know, the more involvement we have from, you know, the local community, you know, are actually the ones who are building this. I think that's the easier the projects tend to go. But to answer your question directly, it's probably the first or second question we're asking every single vendor. You know, what's your plan for it? And then on the backside of that, it goes into our evaluation as well, right? If you know, if all things are equal and one vendor has a well thought out plan for involving the community, especially from an MWBE perspective, that vendor is graded higher in the procurement. You know, I'd certainly be, you know, and Shannon, I don't want to speak for you, but you know, I'm certainly open to if anybody has any ideas to further engage that community along the routes. You know, we have tons of experience, but again, we're always looking to learn a little bit more. If there's something that you've seen in the past that's been productive and very helpful, we're all ears here.
Yeah, and in terms of the disadvantaged communities, we have mapped that out as it relates to the project route. We've identified at this point, there are 4 key areas with the disadvantaged communities. So that would be New Rochelle, Hempstead, the Bronx, and Rockville Center. So that's just high level look at that. We are fortunate in our teaming with the New York Power Authority. They have a very skilled and established EJ program. That is something that we will look to leverage their experiences and offerings to the greatest extent possible on the project. But the first thing we need to do is go in and engage and describe the project, have our folks working with communities, making sure that we are inclusive of all languages, cultural needs. That's going to be critical to making sure those communities are initially pulled into the project conversation and making sure they have a voice in ultimately how this project gets constructed and put in service. So that's step 1. But again, we see this as a partnership with all of the communities and stakeholders. So as Steve noted, we'd love to hear any thoughts of best practices, lessons learned for any of those areas.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Preston. And just to reiterate a comment in the chat, which I think is a bit amusing, but also kind of true. NIMBYs want the benefits of these projects, but they just don't want the inconvenience of the projects. And they'd rather somebody else in somebody else's backyard. And unfortunately, I think that can be true in many, many cases. Okay, so we can see that is this one of the largest transmission energy infrastructure projects that I think I've seen
On
in the state.
On a linear mile basis, there are larger projects out there from an underground perspective, right? NYISO developing Clean Path, and then I'm sure everybody's aware of Champlain Hudson as well. So I mean, that's longer on a per mile basis. You know, I reside in Westchester. I previously worked for the incumbent utility in New York City. You know, so I'm a bit biased, but I mean, I can say, 90 miles of underground transmission line, and I think it's a 14 square mile area. This hasn't been done before, but I think the Transco and the NYPA team here are up for the challenge.
Well, we certainly hope that you are. I don't think you have a choice. All right, so I don't see any more questions in the chat. I want to thank both of you, Shannon and Stephen, for getting in early, introducing us to this project, giving us, a frame of reference for what's needed, why it's needed, some of the pathways. And I know that, you are very, very in the beginning stages, and we're not going to get into the weeds in this discussion, but that you will come back and we will be able to have a more detailed discussion when you have more, more granular level siting done on your part. So, okay, another quick question here. There was 4 disadvantaged communities were identified: Hempstead, Rockville Center, New Rochelle, and then what was the 4th?
Bronx.
Bronx. Okay. Yeah, it's not on Long Island. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. All right. I think that wraps it up.
Thank you very much,
to
Adrian.
our speakers. Thank you to the many people who joined us. I hope it was informative. It's just one more step forward in the path for clean energy and transitioning. In order to transition, we need transmission. There's no way around it. Yeah, it's inconvenient, but it sure is necessary. So I look forward to more of this type of informational work and presentations. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.